The wildfire raged on the horizon, an angry wall of orange and black swallowing everything in its path. The air was thick with smoke, turning the late afternoon sun into a blood-red orb. Paramedic Josh Parker adjusted his mask, wiping the sweat from his brow as he and his partner Elena Vasquez pulled their ambulance onto the gravel driveway of a small suburban home. The radio crackled in his ear. Units in Sector 5, mandatory evacuation, fire perimeter advancing rapidly. Josh knocked on the front door, feeling the heat in the air intensify. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and Mr. Thompson stood there, his face etched with worry, but not enough urgency. Behind him, his wife clutched a framed photo, their teenage son standing with arms crossed, defiant. "Sir," Josh started, his voice firm but calm, "the fire's getting too close. We need to evacuate your family now." Mr. Thompson shook his head, his jaw set. "We've been through this before, son. The fire never makes it this far. We'll be fine." Elena stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Please, you have to listen to us. It's worse this time. The winds are shifting and it's moving faster than anyone predicted." Mrs. Thompson clutched the photo tighter, her lips trembling, but she stayed silent. The boy, probably no older than 16, scoffed. "You're overreacting," he muttered. Josh glanced over his shoulder at the thickening cloud of smoke rolling over the hills behind them. Time was running out. "Look, I know this is your home, but we can't guarantee your safety if you stay." Mr. Thompson sighed, glancing at his wife before shaking his head. "We appreciate it, really, but we're staying put. We'll be all right." Elena looked at Josh, frustration and fear flickering in her eyes. They had other homes to evacuate, other families to save, but protocol was protocol. They couldn't force anyone to leave. Josh hesitated. "We'll check back later, all right? Just be ready." Mr. Thompson nodded, giving them a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, but we'll be fine." As Josh and Elena walked back to the ambulance, Elena whispered, "They're not going to be fine, Josh. We need to stay." Josh exhaled slowly, staring at the house one last time. "We can't make them leave. We have to hope they'll come to their senses." Hours passed. The fire grew stronger, tearing through the hills with relentless fury. Calls flooded in, houses lost, people trapped, chaos spreading faster than the firefighters could contain it. Josh and Elena worked non-stop, moving from street to street, pulling people from burning homes, comforting those who had already lost everything. But the Thompsons stayed on Josh's mind. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that they had made a mistake by leaving. Finally, as they circled back to check on them, his worst fears were confirmed. The house was engulfed in flames. Josh slammed the brakes and they both jumped out, staring in horror. The once quaint home was now a fiery inferno, the roof collapsing inward, sending sparks into the darkening sky. Elena clutched his arm, her voice shaking. "We should have made them leave," she whispered. Josh felt his heart sink. Scattered on the lawn were their belongings, a toppled chair, a scorched family photo album, a child-stuffed toy blackened by smoke. The same photo Mrs. Thompson had been clutching earlier lay in the grass, curling at the edges from the heat. It was too late. The next day, when the flames were finally under control, Josh and Elena returned to the neighborhood, now reduced to smoldering ruins. The once vibrant street was eerily silent, only the sound of crackling embers and the occasional pop of burning wood breaking the stillness. A neighbor, an elderly woman wrapped in a soot-stained shawl, stood by what was left of her fence, staring at the Thompsons' burnt-out home. Josh approached her gently. "Ma'am, did you see them? Did they, The woman turned to him, her eyes hollow, voice distant. "They were outside," she said softly. Josh blinked. "Excuse me?" She nodded toward the house. "I saw them, standing in the yard, all three of them, just standing there, watching the fire. Even after it should have..." Her voice trailed off and she shivered. "It wasn't right. They weren't moving, just standing." A cold chill crept down Josh's spine. He exchanged a glance with Elena, who looked just as unsettled. "You saw them after the fire reached the house?" Elena asked carefully. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes. They were different. Like they were waiting for something." Josh swallowed hard. "And then?" The woman's eyes darted back to the wreckage. "Then they just disappeared, like they were never really there. Josh felt his pulse quicken, a heavy sense of dread settling in his chest. Later, as he and Elena returned to the station, neither of them spoke. They both saw the burnt-out family photo that had somehow survived, lying neatly on the dashboard of their ambulance. Josh whispered under his breath, "We should have made them leave." Days passed, but the memory of the Thompson family haunted them both. Josh began to hear things, footsteps in the station when no one was there, the faint smell of smoke lingering in his gear even after multiple washes. One night, after a long shift, he returned to the ambulance bay to find something that made his blood run cold. There, in the dust near their vehicle, were faint footprints, small ones, leading right up to the ambulance door, then disappearing. Josh stepped back, his breath ragged. He felt Elena come up behind him, her face pale. "Do you see it too?" she whispered. He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yeah." They never spoke of it again, but they both knew. The fire may have taken the Thompsons, but something, some part of them, had stayed behind. And every time they drove past the charred remains of 102 Maple Street, Josh swore he could still see them standing there, watching, waiting. Some warnings are ignored, some promises come too late, and some fires never really die.